mechanism is in part how terrorism actually works to frighten us? And is there some way that we could counteract that?
I actually was consulting recently with the Department of Homeland Security, which generally believes that American security dollars should go to making borders safer. I tried to point out to them that terrorism was a name based on people's psychological reaction to a set of events, and that if they were concerned about terrorism, they might ask what causes terror and how can we stop people from being terrified, but in addition to stopping the atrocities that we're all concerned about. Surely the kinds of a play that at least American media give to, and forgive me, but in raw numbers, these are very tiny accidents. We already know, for example, in the United States, that more people have died as a result of not taking airplanes because they're scared and driving on highways than were killed in 9/11. Okay? If I told you that there was a plague that was going to kill 15,000 Americans next year, you might be alarmed if you didn't find out it was the flu. These are small-scale accidents, and we should be wondering whether they should get the kind of play, the kind of coverage that they do. Surely that causes people to overestimate the likelihood that they'll be hurt in these various ways and gives power to the very people who want to frighten us.
I'd like to hear more on this. So you're saying that our response to terror is, it's a form of mental bug.
Talk
more about it.
It's outsized. I mean, look, if Australia disappears tomorrow, terror is probably the right response. That's an awful large lot of very nice people. On the other hand, when a bus blows up and 30 people are killed, more people than that were killed by not using their seatbelts in the same country. Is terror the right response?
What causes the bug? Is it the drama of the event, that it's so spectacular? Is it the fact that it's an intentional attack by, quote, outsiders? What is it?
Yes. It's a number of things, and you hit on several of them. First, it's a human agent trying to kill us. It's not a tree falling on us by accident. Second, these are enemies who may want to strike and hurt us again. People are being killed for no reason instead of good reason, as if there's good reason, but sometimes people think there are. So there are a number of things that together make this seem like a fantastic event. But let's not play down the fact that newspapers sell when people see something in it they want to read. So there's a large role here played by the media who want these things to be as spectacular as they possibly can.
I mean, what would it take to persuade our culture to downplay it?
Well, go to Israel. Go to Israel and a mall blows up and then everybody's unhappy about it, and an hour and a half later, at least when I was there, and I was 150 feet from the mall when it blew up, I went back to my hotel, and the wedding that was planned was still going on. And as the Israeli mother said, we never let them win by stopping weddings. I mean, this is a society that's learned, and there are others too, that has learned to live with a certain amount of terrorism and not be quite as upset by it, shall I say, as those of us who've not had many terror attacks.
But is there a rational fear that actually the reason we're frightened about this is because we think that the big one is to come?
Yes, of course. So if we knew that this was the worst attack there would ever be, there might be more and more buses of 30 people, we would probably not be nearly so frightened. I don't want to say, please, I'm going to get quoted somewhere as saying terrorism is fine and we shouldn't be so distressed. That's not my point at all. What I'm saying is that surely rationally, our distress about things that happen, about threats, should be roughly proportional to the size of those threats and threats to come. I think in the case of terrorism, it isn't. And many of the things we've heard about from our speakers today, how many people do you know got up and said, poverty, I can't believe what poverty is doing to this. People get up in the morning, they don't care about poverty. It's not making headlines, not making news, it's not flashy, there are no guns going off. I mean, if you had to solve one of these problems, Chris, which would you solve, terrorism or poverty? That's a tough one.
Yeah, there's no question. Poverty by an order of magnitude, a huge order of magnitude. Unless someone can show that there's, terrorists with a nuke are really likely to come. The latest I've read, seen, thought is that it's incredibly hard for them to do that. If that turns out to be wrong, we all look silly. But no, poverty,
even if that were true, still more people die from poverty.
we've evolved to get all excited about these dramatic attacks. Is that because in the past, in the ancient past, we just didn't understand things like disease and systems that cause poverty and so forth, and so it made no sense for us as a species to put any energy into worrying about those things? People died, so be it, but if you got attacked, that was something you could do something about, and so we evolved these responses? Is that what happened?
Well, you know, the people who are most skeptical about leaping to evolutionary explanations for everything are the evolutionary psychologists themselves. My guess is that there's nothing quite that specific in our evolutionary past, but rather, if you're looking for an evolutionary explanation, you might say that most organisms are neophobic. That is, they're a little scared of stuff that's new and different. And there's a good reason to be, because old stuff didn't eat you. Right? Any animal you see that you've seen before is less likely to be a predator than one that you've never seen before. So, you know, when a school bus is blown up and we've never seen this before, our general tendency to orient towards that which is new and novel, I think, is activated. I don't think it's quite as specific a mechanism as the one you alluded to, but maybe a more fundamental one underlying it.
Jay Walker. You know, economists love to talk about the stupidity of people who buy lottery tickets, but I suspect you're making the exact same error you're accusing those people of, which is the error of value. I know because I've interviewed about 1,000 lottery buyers over the years. It turns out that the value of buying the lottery ticket is not winning. That's what you think it is. All right? The average lottery buyer buys about 150 tickets a year, so the buyer knows full well that he or she is going to lose, and yet she buys 150 tickets a year. Why is that? It's not because she is stupid or he is stupid. It's because the anticipation of possibly winning releases serotonin in the brain and actually provides a good feeling until the drawing indicates you've lost. Or to put it another way, for the dollar investment, you can have a much better feeling than flushing the money down the toilet, which you cannot have a good feeling from. Now, economists tend to economists tend to view the world through their own lenses, which is, this is just a bunch of stupid people. And as a result, many people look at economists as stupid people. And so fundamentally, the reason we got to the moon is we didn't listen to the economists. Thank you very much.
Well, it's a great point. It remains to be seen whether the joy of anticipation is exactly equaled by the amount of disappointment after the lottery. Because remember, people who didn't buy tickets don't feel awful the next day either, even though they don't feel great during the drawing. I would disagree that people know they're not going to win. I think they think it's unlikely, but it could happen, which is why they prefer that to the flushing. But certainly I see your point, that there can be some utility to buying a lottery ticket other than winning. Now, I think there's many good reasons not to listen to economists. That isn't one of them for me, but there's many others.
Last question.
My name's Aubrey de Grey from Cambridge. I work on the thing that kills more people than anything else kills. I work on aging, and I'm interested in doing something about it, as we'll all hear tomorrow. I very much resonate with what you're saying, because it seems to me that the problem with getting people interested in doing anything about aging is that by the time aging is about to kill you, it looks like cancer or heart disease or whatever. Do you have any advice?
For you or for them?
In persuading them.
For you in persuading them. Well, it's notoriously difficult to get people to be farsighted. But one thing that psychologists have tried that seems to work is to get people to imagine the future more vividly. One of the problems with making decisions about the far future and the near future is that we imagine the near future much more vividly than the far future. To the extent that you can equalize the amount of detail that people put into their mental representations of near and far future, people begin to make decisions about the two in the same way. So would you like to have an extra $100,000 when you're 65 is a question that's very different than imagine who you'll be when you're 65. Where will you be living? What will you look like? How much hair will you have? Who will you be living with? Once we have all the details of that imaginary scenario, suddenly we feel like it might be important to save so that that guy has a little retirement money. But these are tricks around the margins. I think in general you're battling a very fundamental human tendency, which is to say, I'm here today, and so now is more important than later.
Dan, thank you. Members of the audience, that was a fantastic session. Thank you.
Terrorism. This is a word that was manufactured by the press, the media. There was a horrendous event, and basically they described it by the reaction of the people. when the media covered the event over and over and over and over again in order to sell papers. And that was basically the interest. Not really so much to inform us, but to over-inform us and to over-sensationalize to sell papers. So they came up with the word terror. Now, had they come up with a different word, mongoloid, idiot, dysfunctional, asinine shit, had they said that this was incompetent emotional failure, had they described it in such terms of from the action, not from the reaction, what was the action that happened? Well, the action that happened is a group of stupid, asinine idiots with hardly any education sat in a garage and came up with the idea to either build a pipe bomb, something stupid, or to get into an airplane with a little razor knife and commandeer an airplane and take it over. Lots of ideas of what happened or didn't happen. And we're not here today to argue about 911 or etc., but we're here today to discuss the news coverage. The over-sensationalism, trying to drive profit into the news, not really supplying information about what happened, but oversupplying it and sensationalizing it. Had the news simply covered the events like this. Today in the news, a horrendous thing happened as a bunch of unintelligent, stupid wankers stopped playing with themselves long enough to get into a plane and to crash it into a building. Why did they do this? What was their motivation? Well, actually, it doesn't really matter what their motivation was, because whatever principles they were fighting for, they have disgraced. They have disgraced their family, they have disgraced their religion, they have disgraced everything that they ever stood for, ever could stand for. Whatever shoes that they are wearing, we will not buy. Whatever they represent, they have disgraced. They have made things worse for their family, worse for their friends, worse for the religion that they believe in. Everything is worse. That's what happened.
Well, the question with which I'd like to end is this: if we're so damn stupid, how did we get to the moon? Because I could go on for about 2 hours with evidence of people's inability to estimate odds and inability to estimate value. The answer to this question, I think, is an answer you've already heard in some of the talks, and I dare say you will hear again, namely that our brains were evolved for a very different world than the one in which we are living. They were evolved for a world in which people lived in very small groups, rarely met anybody who was terribly different from themselves, had rather short lives in which there were few choices, and the highest priority was to eat and mate today. Bernoulli's gift, Bernoulli's little formula, allows us, it tells us how we should think in a world for which nature never designed us. That explains why we are so bad at using it, but it also explains why it is so terribly important that we become good fast. We are the only species on this planet that has ever held its own fate in its hands. We have no significant predators. We are the masters of our physical environment. The things that normally cause species to become extinct are no longer any threat to us. The only thing that can destroy us and doom us are our own decisions. If we're not here in 10,000 years, it's going to be because we could not take advantage of the gift given to us by a young Dutch fellow in 1738, because we underestimated the odds of our future pains and overestimated the value of our present pleasures. Thank you.